welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. There is more news coming out of the playoff discussions. Dennis Dodd dropped a very interesting article on CBS Sports about this. We will jump into all of that. We have an NIL bill that is coming out of Utah after the NCAA rules kind of got cut off by the knees by a federal judge a month ago. Then we're going to get into a little update on the 2025 recruiting cycle. The recruiting doesn't stop in college football, as we all know, so got to keep everyone updated for the incredible group of players that are coming through the high school ranks right now. And then make sure you stick around for later because we have another Good Vibes Monday, and we're going back to the college football 25. Well, it is a great place to talk, a great thing to talk about. Tons of interesting updates came by way of Chris Fowler this past week, so definitely want to update you all on that. But before we jump in, I want to remind everyone that we get a ton of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for y'all to get your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here is to use the tip and donations link, at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all to see your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. Alrighty, let's jump right in. The playoff is never ending. There has been incredible amounts of discussions and different ideas and things thrown out there. We started with a 6+6 format going into 2024. That then flipped to a 5+7 format, which is going to be the set format going forward in 2024 and 2025. That seems set in stone. All the media deals are done for that, so no problems there. The problem is what happens afterwards, and there has been a lot of contention between the SEC and the Big Ten and everyone else because the SEC and the Big Ten are starting to flex their muscles a little bit. They're seeing that they hold a lot of power in the college football game, and they are wielding it to the best of their ability. So in the most recent update, if you remember, the SEC and the Big Ten both would have 3 auto bids. The Big 12 and the ACC would have 2 each, followed by 1 for the Group of 5 or Notre Dame, depending on where Notre Dame was in that ranking. So there would only be 2 at-large bids. There was a big push for this from the SEC and the Big Ten because part of this new model would be the SEC and the Big Ten champions every year would get the automatic 2 buys, which was obviously very unpopular, as was the 3 auto bids compared to the 2 auto bids among the Big 12 and the ACC decision makers, and I don't necessarily blame them. You want to be right at the table with everyone else. You want there to be no unfair advantages one way or the other. So one of the ideas that has been kicked around as of late, and one of the ideas that seems to be gaining some traction, is a full at-large playoff. This is something that I have wanted to do for the longest time. I never really understood auto bids in a game where you don't play all the opponents that are going to be up for the playoff. You don't play 90% of the opponents that are up for the playoff. So it's hard then to give auto bids out because you don't know how to properly rate different conferences against the other. So I think this is a really interesting development. I think it's something that's probably better overall for the sport, better overall for what the playoff will look like, but there is a big question around this, and I think, it starts, which I talked about a little bit last week with the SEC and the Big Ten. It felt like when they first came into these conversations, they were throwing a lot of stuff at the wall that were always going to be non-negotiables. Were always going to be something that the ACC and the Big 12 took exception to, and for good reason. So it felt like they were going to the table, throwing out some crazy ideas, not really worrying about whether or not a deal was actually struck between all of them, more worrying about their own interests, and then possibly throwing their hands up saying, well, we tried, and moving on and creating their own subdivision separate from the NCAA. That's where it felt like it was all heading. This kind of makes me feel like maybe we're on a track to where everyone's still a part of the party. Everyone still has their fair shot to get in the playoff, and we have a playoff with all of the schools that could possibly be in it because that's the cool part of college sports. You don't want to see, the same matchups between the same teams in the playoff that you saw in the regular season. It's the same reason a lot of people were very much against having Georgia and Bama in a number of years because they had just played in the SEC championship, and you want to mitigate teams having to play back-to-back matchups as much as possible. So I really like that it seems at least that we're heading in a direction where everyone's involved. And I think the SEC and the Big Ten, this is a very good way to keep them in the conversation. If you're the ACC and the Big Ten, there's no reality where you're going to get an even distribution of auto bids in my eyes, just because of the difference between the SEC and the Big Ten and the Big 12 and the ACC. They're two totally different entities at this point with totally different talent levels and totally different teams, right? So I don't think that was ever going to happen. But going to an all at large model, going to a model with no auto bids, you have to earn your way in, and we'll figure it out whether it's playoff committee or something else, figuring out who are the 12 teams or 14 teams, I suppose, in this scenario, or maybe more. I think this is very helpful to the ACC and the Big 12 to feel like they have a seat at the table, to feel like every year when they come in, no matter if it's Miami still in the ACC or if it's Utah and Kansas State and all of those teams, they still have every bit of a shot to get in if they take care of business. But one of the things that the SEC and the Big Ten have to love is they know who they are, right? They know that they have, I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say last year, if the 12-team playoff was in effect, it would have been 9 SEC teams. So, SEC and Big Ten teams, excuse me. So there's an understanding among them, at least, that if there's more at-large bids, it just means that there's probably more SEC and Big Ten teams because those are the best teams in the country. But then you bring in the question mark of if it is the playoff committee going forward, which was one of the things brought up in this article, was this idea that the auto bid system was just cutting the playoff committee totally out of it. I tend to believe that's what they should be doing, but that's a totally different conversation that we can get to. But I think it seems like, at least, that the decision makers in all of this, the ESPN folks and Fox and all of the real power brokers and all of this, want the playoff committee to be a part of it. It seems that they want them to be the decision makers at the end of the day. I don't necessarily agree with them on that, but they're the ones making the decisions. So it seems like at the very least they want the playoff committee intact. They want them to be handling most of this stuff. But at the end of the day, I think for the SEC and the Big Ten, this works out because you have the best teams. Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, has been in favor of a full at-large system. He thinks it's probably the best way for the SEC to get as big of a foothold in the playoff as possible without, breaking off into their own entity. So I think there is a little bit of everything in this type of idea with a full at-large field because everyone has a shot. There's no one in the country, really, that doesn't have a shot. Obviously, group of 5 teams are going to have to work a little bit harder, like Cincinnati did in 2021. So there's going to be hurdles for more teams. The ACC and the Big 12 teams, especially if Florida State and other teams start to leave the ACC, they're going to have to work harder to get in comparative to the SEC and the Big 10. But if you were to ask me, I would say I think they technically should. If there's this huge gap in talent and ability among the teams in the SEC and the Big 10 and the ACC and the Big 12, there should be somewhat of a, I don't want to say a bias, but some sort of a leaning towards the SEC and the Big 10 because a team that goes 8-4, and Ole Miss, let's say, goes 8-4 in the SEC, there's a real argument to be made that that's more impressive than going 10-2 in the Big 12, right? So there is a lot of different things at hand here, and it'll be interesting to see, first of all, what the decision ends up being, because they're kind of under a clock right now. It looks like they want to have the deal done by at least the end of the month, because you have to lock up media deals, you have to lock up sponsorships, tons of things have to happen. So they got to get this going pretty quickly, even though it doesn't take effect until 2026. So there's a lot of different opinions on this. I think the big question mark is going to be who are the decision makers, how they're making the decision, and is there really going to be an opening for a group of 5 team, or for a, even an ACC team in an ACC that looks a lot different than the one we know today? Is there going to be a real shot for them to get in, or are they going to be kind of have to go undefeated territory to even sniff the playoff? I guess we'll find out with all of that. But one of the other big players in all of this is the revenue distribution. I think this is another way that they kind of appeased the SEC and the Big Ten and kind of made them come back to the table with genuine desire to make a deal work with everyone. So one of the proposals that was thrown out, and I'm sure this will not be the last because it does favor the SEC and the Big Ten quite a bit. Apparently, the SEC and the Big Ten would be splitting about 58% of the revenue that comes from the playoff. The Big 12 and the ACC would split about 32%, it seems, and then 10% left for Notre Dame and the group of 5 schools. And just so everyone's on the same page, if Notre Dame and a group of 5 school were to get in the same year, which seems pretty likely in the 14-team or possibly even 16-team playoff, Notre Dame would get a lot of that 10%. I can promise you that. I don't know the exact division. Maybe they would divide it evenly. I don't know. But I tend to believe that Notre Dame would get the long end of the straw there. But in the former model, it was about 78%, or around $400 million, going to the Power 5 that was split evenly among the conferences, and then 22% going to the Group of 5, and then they had at their own discretion, could split that how they saw fit, depending on the year. So a lot of different things at play here, a lot of changes, and a lot of more division being made between the conferences. Obviously, the Power 5 used to stand as an entity. They used to stand together, especially in the revenue format, and now that is totally different. And I totally understand that it kind of has to be to keep the SEC and the Big Ten engaged in these conversations. So if that's what has to happen, I suppose that's, I'm all for it. So be it, as it were. But I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of all the decisions being made, just because you want a college football that is as level of playing field as possible. It's impossible to make college football totally even, because you can't control how big a alumni base is for a school. You can't control how much alumni base is willing to give to an NIL collective. You can't control some of the outside stuff. But what you can control is how much money they're getting from the big entity in all of this, the college football playoff or the NCAA or whatever name you want to come up for with the new college football governing body that seems to be right around the corner. I think it's their responsibility to keep every team in it as much as possible. And it's really hard, obviously, to keep Wake Forest competing with Georgia. And I'm not necessarily saying they should help Wake Forest clean up the gap, but I'm just saying creating a revenue sharing system that wildly benefits the SEC and the Big Ten only inflates that difference more and more, right? It only creates more ability for them to go out and get teams, and more ability for the teams in the ACC and the Big 12 to want to go to one of these big conferences. So there's a lot at play here. I tend to believe that this is really the only way that they were going to get the SEC and the Big Ten to stick around. So I can't necessarily argue with them for that. I think this is obviously going to be a continuous battle. There's no longer any idea in my mind that they are, I think they're close-ish to a decision, in the sense that they are making headway on certain issues, but there still feels like there's a lot to be figured out. There is a ton to iron out and a ton to make sure that everyone's on the same page for before the end of the month, because if it leaks over into April, then a lot of things come into play that have to happen a lot quicker than all of these decision makers want it to be. So it seems like we're going to have a definitive answer by the end of this month, and we will keep you all updated as more details come out. I tend to hope that they land on a 16-team, no at-large, or all-at-large bid model, because I think it makes the most sense. I think they should do a BCS-type ranking system instead of a 13 people in a room making the decision. But that's all the conversations for another day. So I could break all that down in a totally different segment. But for right now, that's the playoff update. There has been a ton of stuff coming at us very, very quickly from that realm, and I'm sure it will not stop anytime soon. But for right now, it looks like we're at least slowly heading towards a resolution. But we're going to take a small break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about NIL and a new bill that is out of Utah that is quite restrictive on NIL rules. So we will get into that right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a playoff update, some very, very contentious conversations going on out there in Texas right now. It seems like we'll have a resolution to the new format in 2026 and going forward by the end of the month, but we will keep you all updated on all of that. But let's jump into NIL, because there was a very interesting bill that is coming out of Utah right now that essentially is the NCAA rules, which is very interesting. Front Office Sports' Margaret Fleming did a great article about this, and in the article they talked about, first of all, the bill itself, and there is a ton of different new things that are going on, and some not so new necessarily. First of all, the number one thing in this bill is NIL partnerships over $600 in the state of Utah would have to be disclosed to the university, which is a rule that was in place by the NCAA that was recently shut down by a federal judge for possibly violating antitrust laws. So very interesting move by Utah. I wonder if this is something that could have the same fate if a student takes exception to that or decides to go against that. It'll be interesting to see if we have a similar court case coming down the barrel around Utah. But another part of the bill is it would ban student athletes from having any partnerships with alcohol, marijuana or tobacco products, vaping or e-cigarettes, controlled substances in any way, gambling, betting, sexually oriented businesses, or some firearms, at least the ones that they as students cannot buy. So a lot of restrictions, a lot of things that they have to keep their minds on as young student athletes, worrying about 10 different things at once. So they now have to worry about these new rules. And this bill has rolled through the House and the Senate in Utah, and it looks like it's going to sail through the last obstacle as well. The governor has been very, very vocal including last Friday, talking about how he approves of this bill. He believes it is a good thing for the future of NIL in his state. And so it looks like it is going to get signed into law, and it will go into effect May 1st, which obviously is prime recruiting time. Tons of stuff going on around all of those campuses. So Utah and BYU have some very interesting new things that they have to teach their kids, teach their recruits, and hopefully not, suffer in recruiting because of this. But one of the bill's sponsor, Jordan Teuscher, was trying to mirror the NIL rules put in place by the NCAA. He feels like those rules made sense. However, he also said he doesn't necessarily believe that it should be up to the states to make rules, because having different rules in every single state, especially in the world of the transfer portal, is a very dangerous proposition and could get a lot of kids into trouble when they didn't even think they would be in trouble, or maybe they shouldn't be in trouble. So a lot of different layers to this that need to be put into thought when you're creating all of these different rules and regulations, because something like that, where Utah felt the need as a state to step up and get some good ideas or get some real regulations over NIL, the need for that is something that you wish wouldn't have to take place, I guess is the best way to say it. You wish that these states didn't have to get involved and we had a governing body, whether it was the NCAA or the College Football Playoff or a totally new entity altogether. You wish there was an ability to get common sense rules in place and have everyone follow them and them all be uniform, but I think it seems like there's not really that on the horizon, at least not glaringly on the horizon, as I guess. There has been a lot of desire for people in Congress to step up and create federal laws around NIL. It doesn't seem like they're anywhere close to taking action, and that makes sense. It is an election year. There is a lot of stuff going on in this country and around the world, so it doesn't seem like this is remotely towards the top of their plate, and it doesn't seem like it should be. So it seems like we are going to have to, either other states are going to have to jump in the same way Utah did, or we're going to have to get some type of governing body that can put in rules that make sense and that can be enforceable, and not enforceable in a way that is against the rules, that is against antitrust laws. So there are tons of layers here. There's tons of things to worry about. But for right now, Utah felt like they had to do something, and what they did was one of the more restrictive NIL laws in the country. And it'll hurt recruiting in some sense in Utah. All of that being said, Utah and BYU are two schools that already have some of these NIL rules in place, because they have certain rules on their campuses. They don't, on BYU at least, they don't allow alcohol, so can't have any NIL deals with alcohol. So a lot of the, controlled substances, marijuana, tobacco products, those type of rules, gambling and betting, those have been in place, it seems, for quite some time at Utah and BYU, at least since NIL has become a thing. So some of this will not be new. Some of this will not necessarily change the world that Utah and BYU students live in. But in terms of recruiting, it is a totally new thing that you have to tell a 17 or 16-year-old kid that when you come here, these are the certain things that you're going to have to follow. These are the certain things that you're going to have to worry about on top of doing football. And I think that's something that might be a deterrent to these kids. Obviously, student athletes have to worry about incredible amounts of things throughout their day, whether it's practice or film study or class, or I don't know why class was third there. Class should be number one. But tons of stuff that they need to worry about on top of NIL and all of this stuff. And if you add new rules, it creates a whole nother layer. So student athletes are going to have to be very diligent in the dealings that they make and the people that they're trusting to make these dealings for them. schools will have to make sure that they educate their athletes as soon as possible and as vigorously as possible, because you don't want to be caught in these crazy NIL lawsuits, and you don't want your student athletes getting in trouble for violating these rules that are very new, and some of them might not fully understand the rules. So you got to make sure they understand it as quickly as possible. But going back to the recruiting side of this, Utah and BYU, this is going to affect them. I don't necessarily think it's going to affect them a ton, but you never really know. There's always a worry, and one of the big things here is Utah is one of the first states to jump in and to say something about NIL and to do something this concrete about NIL. So other states are going to counter. There will be multiple states that will release their own NIL rules and regulations, their own laws, their own guidelines around NIL in general. So who's to say, Florida or Texas or New York or whoever is not able to create a law that is not quite as restrictive, that is a little bit nicer to the student athletes, that gives you a little bit more leeway and a little bit more time to worry about football instead of worrying about the different contracts you're signing and everything like that. So there is going to be a very interesting little battle, I suppose, between different lawmakers in different states, because these college football programs bring in a ton of money to the state. There's no two ways about that. And if you cut them off at the ankles in recruiting and all of that type of stuff in NIL, you're going to hurt the amount of money that is getting brought in by these teams, and then hurt the amount of money that's going to the state. So all of this is a domino effect, and it'll be interesting to see how other states counter. It'll be interesting to see how, or if other states counter, that is. And I think one of the things that is kind of saving Utah in some of this craziness is it doesn't seem that they will have to disclose, or it doesn't seem like the dealings that they make or the deals that they sign will become public record as they would before. So for a long time, pretty much since the inception of NIL, when you sign a deal above, I believe $600 was the moniker. It might be a little bit more than that, but those would immediately go into records, and then they would become public record after X amount of time. I'm not sure exactly how long, but that would not be the case in Utah. So all of your dealings would be under wraps, essentially, at the university level. So a very interesting little tidbit in there. The sponsor of the bill, just felt like it wasn't anyone's business. These are private contracts that should stay private. So it's a very interesting last layer to kind of throw on there. But recruiting is going to be affected in Utah. I don't think there's any two ways about that. Whether it's affected a ton, I'm not necessarily sure, because a lot of these rules were kind of in place at Utah and BYU because they're different universities than everywhere else. So it'll be really interesting to see how all this kind of works out. But if recruiting does kind of suffer a little bit, someone like Kyle Whittingham is not going to lose his step. He is one of the best coaches in the country and develops talent as good as anyone. So he's someone that could definitely ride out a wave of not necessarily the best recruiting in the world. So overall, I tend to agree with the sponsor of this bill that states should not be the ones handling NIL, or at least they should not be the ones long-term handling NIL. There has to be uniform laws across the entirety of college football, and whether that's the federal government getting involved, as I've said, I don't necessarily think that's happening anytime soon, but or a new governing body for college football, whatever that looks like, there needs to be common sense, wide-reaching laws that kind of cover NIL, because if there isn't, kids are going to get taken advantage of. You're going to lose fans to this kind of professionalized model that it's slowly becoming in college sports. You're going to have more kids transferring. You're going to have a ton of horror stories of kids signing deals and not understanding what the deal is and losing money. So there's a lot of different things that could happen in this Wild West that we live in. So I guess at least Utah got some type of hat on all of this. It's got some type of a thing to stop the flooding that was happening around the NIL world. But at the end of the day, until a real governing body, a uniform governing body around college football steps up and makes some common sense decisions around NIL, then nothing's really going to change in my eyes. There's still going to be all these problems around it. So the second we have those rules, those comprehensive rules across all conferences, I think we're off and rolling with NIL. But for the time being, it doesn't look like we're remotely close to that. So we'll keep writing that out. We hope that either more states follow Utah's lead, or hopefully a governing body steps up and kind of creates that structure for everyone. But we're going to take another break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the 2025 recruiting cycle. There are a ton of kids in high school that are just wildly talented in this group. This is a really, really good recruiting class, so want to get y'all updated as quickly as possible on what's going on early in the 2025 cycle. So stick around, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a new NIL deal that just came out of Utah that is a little bit more restrictive than some other ones out there, but let's get into some recruiting talk. The 2025 recruiting cycle is well underway. There are a ton of guys that are already committed. There are a ton of guys that are starting to heat up towards a commitment, setting some official visit dates over the summer, which is the crazy time for recruiting, but got to get y'all primed. There is a ton of really, really talented guys in this cycle, and we're going to start on the offensive side of the ball because breaking down everyone in this class in one segment would be near impossible. But the Under Armour Next Tour is a tour that goes around to different major cities in the U.S. and shows off some of the best high school talent in those cities. So currently in Dallas, one of the most talent-rich places in the country, and a place that a lot of teams look at when they're trying to recruit kids. So a lot of new news coming out. So I thought I would get y'all up to date. And let's start with the team that is setting the pace in recruiting overall, but especially on the offensive side of the ball in 2025. The LSU Tigers are cooking in every sense of the word. Bryce Underwood is where it all starts, the best quarterback in the country, the best player in the country. Coming down to Baton Rouge from Belleville, Michigan. Obviously, tons of teams are going to keep pushing for this guy. He is absolutely special in every sense of the word. Michigan is obviously, his hometown team, the team that will be pushing for him the hardest. But for right now, LSU has him, and it looks like he is pretty locked in, or as locked in as you can be this early on in the process. Another guy on the LSU group is DeCorian Moore, who is the top wide receiver in the class, number 3 player in the country, committed to the Bayou Bengals from Duncanville, Texas, a remarkable program out in Dallas that is doing just incredible things over the last couple of years. Texas, Ohio State, and Oregon are really going to be the teams that are going to push to the very, very end for Moore. I saw he set up visits to Texas and I believe Texas A&M as well early on in June. So 2 teams to definitely watch there. There is going to be a ton of guys going after DeCorian Moore because he is an absolute game changer and definitely the best wide receiver in the country. And then why wouldn't they have the number 1 running back recruit as well, right? Harlem Berry, the one in-state kid of the group, number 12 player in the country, super talented, is just incredible in every way, and this is quite the trio to start the cycle for LSU. I mean, you got to keep them intact, obviously, which is 90% of the battle when it comes to recruiting. But for right now, you have a remarkable trio going into next year where a lot of stuff is up in the air. So you could see a lot of young guys, including Bryce Underwood, starting very early on in their LSU careers. But let's jump into some positions because there are a lot of really, really talented guys. I will definitely not get to all of them today, but I'll try to get around to some of the big boys. So let's start with the quarterbacks, and let's start with Julian Lewis, a USC commit right now from Carrollton, Georgia, and as you can imagine, UGA is pushing as hard as possible. They are someone that is definitely someone to watch. I think USC is a little bit worried about the Bulldogs right now, but number 2 quarterback in the country, USC has just got to hold on to him. I think they lost Malachi Nelson. He wasn't necessarily the player that I think a lot of people, including myself, thought he was going to be at USC. He is now at Boise State, so you need the guy to step in. It looks like Julian Lewis could be that guy, but you got to hold off the big dogs before you can get him. So him with Lincoln Riley would be an absolute show. He would be incredible to watch, but you got to fend off UGA to do it. And then a couple of in-state kids that are going to their big schools is George McIntyre out of Brentwood, Tennessee, heading to be a Vol, at least as of right now, is locked in to be a Tennessee Volunteer. And then Taven Sinclair from Bellefonte, Ohio, heading to be a Buckeye. So both those guys deciding to stay in-state at their big-time schools, both incredibly talented and likely will start relatively early. Obviously, Nico Iamaleava over at Tennessee, and then Ohio State has Will Howard with a slew of incredible quarterbacks right behind him. So Taven Sinclair might take a little bit more time, but both very, very talented guys that I'm sure you'll be watching on Saturdays at some point soon. And then we got a couple more notable guys. Deuce Knight from Lucedale, Mississippi, a Notre Dame commit, I think number 4th in the country overall. KJ Lacey, a Texas commit from Alabama, which is very interesting because he was a teammate of a current Bama wide receiver, Ryan Williams, that just signed there and is now on campus for spring workout. So Bama will be pushing hard for KJ Lacey. There's no two ways about that. And then Madden Iamaleava, the brother of Nico, is a 4-star that is uncommitted right now. Could be going to Tennessee, but as we talked about earlier, George McIntyre is a hard guy to pass up. So it could be that someone else gets an Iamaleava on their roster. And then DeCorian Moore, we talked about earlier, his teammate, Keelan Russell at Duncanville, currently an SMU recruit, but tons of guys are pushing for this kid. He has played a ton of winning football. It seems like he's going to be a little bit hard to flip from the ponies, but Florida is one of the teams that is pushing incredibly hard to get that guy's services. So let's run over to running backs now. Let's talk about the guys that will be flanking these quarterbacks possibly at the next level. We talked about Harlem Berry. He is out of this world, number 1 guy in the class. Let's talk about the number 2 and 3 guys in the class. Number 2 is Akeelan Deere. He is someone out of Mississippi. He has been crystal balled to Ole Miss. I'm sure Ole Miss will do anything to get that in-state kid on campus as quickly as possible, especially with Quinshon Judkins out the door. So you need some running back help as soon as possible. Obviously, this is a little bit down the road, but got to keep that train moving if you want the Lane Kiffin offense to keep rolling the way it has been. And then we have a Clemson commit, Gideon Davidson from Lynchburg, Virginia. Both incredibly talented. Only other top 10 running back that is committed is Anthony Rogers, who is committed to Bama. So only 3 guys committed in the top 10. 4 others have crystal balls. Those include Bo Jackson, which is an awesome name for a running back. I'd want that kid immediately. He is crystal balled to Ohio State. Jordan Davison was crystal balled to Texas. Alvin Henderson to Auburn. So tons of guys still on the board here. A couple of guys that are committed and sealed, but definitely a lot to be said in that running back class and a lot of really talented guys to choose from. But let's jump over to wide receivers. We talked about DeCorian Moore. He is an absolute game changer in every way. One other top guy is actually committed, which is the number 5 guy in the class, or number 5 receiver in the class, Dallas Wilson. He is headed to Oregon, it seems. Caleb Cunningham, the number 2 guy in the wide receiver class, is kind of a battle between his home state, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State. He is a Mississippi kid, and it seems like both those schools are doing everything in their power to get his services, and with Jeff Lebby over at Mississippi State, I wouldn't necessarily count out the Bulldogs quite yet. Another guy, Jamie French, with two Fs at the beginning, which is very interesting, was a Bama commit up until mid-January when the coaching changes started to happen. He has taken visits to USC, Florida State, and Texas since then, so tons of teams that will be pushing for him, but Bama's still right in the thick of it for him. All of the top 5 guys here are 5 stars, tons of talent in this wide receiver class, so whoever pops up on your screen, definitely check out their highlights and check out what they did in high school, because I'm sure their numbers are just mind-boggling. But let's roll on over to tight ends. And imagine that the top tight end in the class is going to UGA, Ellis Williams from Camden County High School. They also have a commitment from Ethan Barber, the number 9 tight end in the class. So Georgia and Todd Hartley continue to do what they do best, which is just load that tight end room with talent. But the two guys behind Ellis Williams are Lincoln Cure and Keoti Armstrong at 2 and 3. Cure looks like he is going to be heading to Kansas State, has been crystal balled there, but I'm sure there are a ton of teams looking for his services. And Armstrong's kind of up in the air. He has scheduled visits to A&M and Texas for June, so those are two teams that are absolutely in it, but a lot up in the air for that guy as well. So the only other top 10 commit that is in this tight end class is James Flanagan, a 4-star out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, who is set to go to Notre Dame right now. So still a ton to figure out in this tight end class, a ton of guys that are still on the board, but right now it's UGA as always kind of dominating that tight end recruiting right now. And let's jump to O-line, where UGA is doing just fine as well. And let's start with offensive tackle. David Sanders Jr. is kind of leading the pack out of Charlotte, North Carolina, Providence Day School. Not a ton of crystal balls from him. There are a million teams that are going to be in on him, so we will definitely keep you updated with what he does. He is followed closely by Michael Fafusi, who is out of Louisville, Texas. He was recently crystal balled to Texas, but Oklahoma is battling very hard. Bill Bedenbaugh is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country, so it will definitely be a battle up until the end. But as of right now, it looks like Texas is in a very good position for him. Georgia has a couple of crystal balls for a top offensive tackles. Ohio State and Arkansas have commits from top 11 guys. This one is totally open, though. There are not a lot of guys that are outright committed. There are not a lot of guys. There are not even a lot of guys that have a ton of crystal balls. So still a ton to figure out with the offensive tackle. And then interior offensive lineman. The top guy, Solomon Thomas, is a Florida State commit. He seems locked in there. LSU and Florida both have top 7 guys, and Dylan Harper for LSU and Peyton Johnson for Florida, both committed. And then Georgia right back there with 2 top 10 guys, crystal balled to them, and Mason Short and Cortez Smith, both in-state guys, which always helps. But Georgia cleaning up on the offensive line the same way that they clean up at the tight end position, because those are the 2 positions that Georgia has proven that they are a little bit above the pack and than everyone else. Stacy Searles has done an incredible job there. But overall, this class is incredibly talented. I talked about the wide receivers, especially just so many names up and down that board that are incredible. I didn't even get to guys down towards the 20s like Marcus Harris, who could be total game changers the second they step on campus. So a ton of talent in this class. The quarterbacks are going to be incredible to watch. Madden Iamaliava is someone I'm watching very closely, because most likely not going to Tennessee with George McIntyre already committed there, but you never know what happens. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. Tons of guys to watch. Jamie French is a very, very interesting prospect. And then David Sanders Jr. is a game changer. Anyone that can get the top offensive tackle in the class always feels pretty good about that. So I think he's someone that will be watching very, very closely, and definitely more to happen in this recruiting cycle. As we know, things change very, very quickly in today's age. So I will keep you updated as much as possible. But obviously, as of right now, just to give you guys an idea of where we're sitting with this 2025 recruiting class, because things happen very quickly, so you want to at least know the names going into summer. So we will definitely do defense at some point. so we can jump into all the incredible defensive talent like Elijah Griffin that is on their way to the college level. But for right now, we're going to take our last break of the show. And when we come back, we're going to do a Good Vibes Monday. And it is going back to the College Football 25 well. Talking about this game just makes me happy. So we're going to go back to that well. We're going to use that again. But stick with us, and we will be right back. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the incredible names across the 2025 recruiting cycle, some of the teams, including LSU, that have jumped out to an incredible start there. And now let's get into some Good Vibes Monday. If you have not tuned in for a Good Vibes Monday yet, it is all about just starting the week off right, starting the week off with something that gets everyone a little bit happy. And I've noticed that going back to the College Football 25 game is never a bad strategy to make college football fans in a good mood to start the week. So that's what we're doing tonight. There were some very, very interesting updates that came through this past week and into last week a little bit about the future of this game, and some not so good, some very good. So let's start with the not so good to get that out of the way. As most of you know, I'm sure, Arch Manning has reportedly decided that he will not be in the game. He has opted out. I don't love the decision. I don't much understand the decision, but it's his decision to make, I suppose. So I'm not necessarily going to spend too much time on that. I know there are a lot of people, tearing him down. A lot of people have a lot of big opinions about Arch Manning, let's say that. But at the end of the day, his decision to make. Not the decision I would have made, of course, but, not my decision to make. So another not so great piece of news is the NCAA awards look like they are not going to be in the game. This does not include the Heisman, which is in the game, which is great news. But the Joe Moore Award for the top O-line, Bolitnikoff for the top wide receiver, those type of Walter Camp, all of these awards, Doak Walker. So tons of awards that we all love, that we'd love to be in the game, are not in the game because they felt like the dollar value that was offered to them was not correct based on what they bring to the table. So I hope that is figured out by the time 2026 comes out, but we'll see. It'll be interesting. And as I understand it, guys like Manning or other people that might opt out and that might come out soon cannot be recreated in the game as they were in the past. It seems like they are going to bar you from doing that in some way, whether it's just not letting you put Manning on any jersey, I don't know. But it seems like that's not going to be able to happen, which is not ideal for the people that wanted all the rosters on there to be fully correct. But at the end of the day, it's one player, so game keeps moving. But now let's get into some good news, because there is a lot of really, really fun stuff that came out this past week, and it all came from Chris Fowler, it felt like. He is the guy that if you want instant updates on this game, I feel like you should be following him on Instagram immediately, because the dude gives us a lot. He gives us a lot of really, really fun nuggets, and it's part of the reason we love him. He gives a great peek behind the curtain whenever he can. So apparently he had 2 recording sessions last week, which must be just remarkably exhausting. I'm sitting here talking for an hour, and it is exhausting. And he's sitting there probably talking for about 4 to 6 hours and saying the same lines over and over, just with a new team inserted in. So I can't imagine how exhausting those are. But he said he recorded all of the playoff voiceovers, which is very exciting. He did the on-campus games, the quarterfinals, the semis, and obviously the national championship. He said getting to experience a national championship setup in March is incredible, and I gotta imagine this, being able to experience one of the biggest nights in the sport when the sport is not remotely going on has gotta feel pretty good. So I'm a little jealous of him for that, but he did say they would have specific national championship calls for all 134 teams. So he went through from Kansas State to Georgia. There were Kennesaw State to Georgia, a million different teams that he covered throughout this game. And apparently the national championship calls will be specified for all those teams. So pick whatever team you want, whatever small team you love, whether it's Troy, Tulane, it doesn't matter. You will have a specific national championship call, which is always a really, really cool thing. Apparently, if you pick Colorado and Dion, you will get a very interesting playoff call, one that might be a little bit more special, which I think makes a little bit of sense given how Colorado has been the talk of the town for the last little bit. So if that inclines you to pick the Buffs, then go right for it, because apparently that call is a little bit more special than the others, let's say. This game has pretty much everything. The detail in this game is going to be absolutely remarkable, it seems, and one of the other ways that they have proven that is Chris Fowler said he recorded one this week, or last week, I suppose, where if you win a game where your defense recovers a fumble in the end zone to win a game, that is in the game. So everything that you could possibly think of, even a scenario that happens very, very rarely and almost never is in the game. So you could have any number of things happen, and I'm sure that they have had some type of call with Chris Fowler doing that. So another great addition to this game, because that's what we want when we play these games. We want as much reality as possible, as much, real fun calls as possible, and specific calls, because in past games, whether it's been NCAA or FIFA or any of these sports games, some of the calls at times have been a little bit bland. Let's be honest. There have been some guys kind of missing the mark a little bit over the years, but it seems like this one is going to be very high energy, and having Chris Fowler on the call is as good as it gets. He also said in his video, and it's been reported a number of different places, that over 10,000 players have already opted into the game. The original report said around 11,000 invitations, or a little bit more than that, were sent out to players. So a remarkable return rate for kids opting into this game, and I would expect nothing less. I think all of these kids, including are right around my age or a little bit younger, which sounds weird to say, but a lot of these kids are just reliving their childhood, and being in this game is an absolute dream come true. So totally makes sense that all of these guys are jumping at the bit and really, really want to be a part of this game. That would be around $6 million that has been sent out by EA to all these kids, about 600 apiece, what was originally reported. So quite a big chunk of change to be sending out to these athletes. But if that's what needs to happen to have this this game be as good as possible and kind of bring back all the feels for the kids my age, I'm all for it. So another piece of good news that could be very interesting here in the next little bit is there seems to be another window to opt into the game. So guys like Arch Manning, and it doesn't seem like any other athlete has been at least forward or open about their plans to not participate, but only 10,000 or a little bit over 10,000 have accepted, 11,000 were sent out. So there's still a number of guys that are waiting for whatever to happen. So it'll be interesting to see if any of those guys jump in the second iteration. Hopefully Arch Manning changes his mind and jumps in, but we'll see. There's still a ton to figure out about this game. And I think everyone wants this game to come as quickly as possible, but it seems like it's taking time for a good reason. It seems like all of the stuff is being put in order. They're getting their ducks in a row, and they're making sure that all of the fans that buy this game, none of them are disappointed in the detail, in the atmospheres, in the calls, and all of the stuff that we love about this game. Especially, incredible Chris Fowler call is unlike anything else in this sport. So having all of that stuff in the game, having so much detail in the game, whether it's having NIL in the game, transfer portal, being able to customize your own conferences, which I will definitely be playing around with once I get on there, because I don't love the conference situation we got going on. But that's, again, a conversation for another day. But I think it's going to be an incredible game. I really do feel that way. I really hope it comes out on time, because I'm going to get impatient very quickly as summer starts to approach. But it's an incredible way for me and so many others, I'm sure a lot of you watching this, to kind of relive really, really great parts in our childhoods. It was something that I did with my friends on hours on end, whether it was Dynasty mode or Road to Glory was where I spent a lot of my time creating some weird players like Ezekiel Chubb-Net and, Ezekiel Elliott, Nick Chubb, and Leonard Fournette, little amalgamation of those three players. It was just incredible times with all of your buddies around a screen, taking turns playing different games. So it's something that I'm really, really looking forward to. It's something that when it comes out, I will not be locked in on anything as locked in as I will be on my Dynasty mode and getting my players to the championship no matter what school I pick. So I'm extremely excited. I think it's very possible that in the future, when this game does come out, I might just start a weekly segment updating you guys on my Dynasty teams and my Road to Glory players, because, man, it's fun. And I cannot wait to get back on the sticks and get back into that game, because it's my favorite game of all time. Playing 2014 when I was a kid was as much fun as I've ever had. I had every game from I think 2008 to 2014, and we played them nonstop, me and my siblings. So incredibly happy to get this game back. We will figure out what the logistics are if I'm going to do a little Dynasty mode. Maybe y'all can drop some ideas for teams that I can take to the national title, hopefully, in the comments. But so excited for this game. Could not be more excited for a video game. I'm not necessarily the biggest gamer in the world, but this is one that I will absolutely pre-order. I will be waiting for it to come out, and when it finally comes out, I will be essentially off the planet for about 12 hours because I will be so locked in. So whoever needs to get in contact with me a couple of days after this game comes out. But for now, we have to wait. For now, we're going to wait a little bit longer, and hopefully some more details come out to get us even more and more excited, and hold off that need for the game as long as possible, because it's just going to be incredible when it comes. And I cannot wait any longer, but we got to. So that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for tuning in. Your support means a ton to us, so please remember to leave a positive review. It makes a huge difference for us here at the network. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or X, TikTok, Instagram for all the content and updates. We have incredible people doing incredible work here that cover every single sport you could think of, all the way down to wrestling. So anything that you could want is on our channel, so definitely give us a follow. GSMC Sports on YouTube, so incredible content coming out every single day. Definitely check us out. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad